Good morning, everybody, or good day, and welcome to Kulosaari Casino. I hope you join the view. It's a wonderful view. I love this place. My name is Barbara Lübeck, and I will be your host today when we are rethinking infrastructure financing in the Nordics. As you probably know, we have many dignitary speakers here today, and I wish that the presentations and the discussions afterwards will give you many new thoughts and insights in the difficult task to finance big infrastructure projects in our countries. We will first hear about several working financial solutions from different parts of the world, and after that we will hear about the situation here in Finland, Sweden, Iceland and Norway. We will continue without a break, so we can start the lunch a little bit earlier than planned. And you all will have many opportunities to join the discussion, so please prepare to ask if there is something on your mind. We will be very, very happy if you use your expertise in this event. The hashtag for Twitter is RIFN18. RIFN 18, och på finska RIFN 18. The seminar will also be published on YouTube afterwards, so you can come back to the issues later on as well. And welcome also all of you who are following our stream. But first, I'm very delighted to ask Minister of Transport and Communications, Mrs. Anne Berner, to take the stage for the opening words. Please join me in welcoming Anne Berner.
Thank you, Baba, and welcome on my behalf also all of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us here today to discuss infrastructure, finance models, but also I think in more or less what we think about the development of transport as such. I think we can agree that transport has had an interesting few years, and there are many developments that have made a huge difference. We are very used by now to speak about digitalization, which has enabled transport to become a field of service. And we are moving from much of self-service into an area where we are being and searching for different solutions to get services. Digitalization has also enabled us to create door-to-door platforms, new mobility as a service operators. By using and creating possibilities to open and share data, we are becoming in a totally different environment and also seeing many new business models. At the same time, we also face a second large factor, which is the technology developments, automation, robotization, which takes place in all transport modes. We see more and more small robots doing services on roads. May they be delivering food from a restaurant to a home. May they be automated vehicles that deliver mail, that have a small drone on their top to service or servitize the last mile. Or to have shared vehicles, which in the future will be fully automated. We see developments that can be a competition to rails, ideas like hyperloops that are in development. In the air, we have drones, unmanned aircraft, becoming something of a daily thing in many ways. These will disrupt the way transport is seen. And at the same time, automated systems are creating also the possibility for traffic management in a way which can interact, create holistic transport systems where all vehicles and transport modes are interconnected and providing a service that is both efficient, safe and secure, but also using and supporting us when we look at energy and climate solutions. Climate being the third large megatrend that transport has been influenced by. And climate and climate change, the need to reduce emissions from our transport system, the search for energy efficiency in transport, and is also something that is both based on the way we choose to behave, where digitalization is a large solution, but it's also something that is related to energy efficiency, the electrification of our transport system, and at large, it's also about the solution for how we can create energy efficiency into the system by connecting vehicles, transport systems. The way we live, the way we are doing our work, everything is changing also by urbanization, and at the same time also by creating smart solutions for countryside. How will our infrastructure be created? What consists of infrastructure? What can be defined as infrastructure in the future? We will probably see a different need for connecting vehicles in a different way. Parking will be moved outside of our cities. We will emphasize walking and cycling. We will have many different solutions. We will work from home and do other kinds of areas where we can make sure that climate change is something where we are actually thinking with values and making changes in the way that we create our decisions about our mobility. All of this is based on platforms. Digitalization creates and enables us to create ecosystems around transport with mobility as a service in its core. But at the same time, we also see that transport has a new transport mode, which we know is data. Data is creating in our transport system in a different possibility that enables us to have new business models, and at the same time also use data in a way that we can create transport services, logistics in a different environment. So what we are looking for is basically the platform on which all of this is happening. That is our infrastructure. Infrastructure is needed today in different ways. We need a digital infrastructure to move the data, and we need our physical infrastructure to be connected to the same system. We also see that communications and transport are moving closer together and becoming integrated in a way that has never happened before. When we speak about infrastructure, we speak about creating a holistic platform that enables us to access and to get a service level that is provided, which means that we have to have a road network, a rail, the seas, the air, and the digital infrastructure in one platform that allows us to bring together all these services. How will we have a promise on that service level? How will we enable the finance of that infrastructure in the future? In Finland, so far, our physical infrastructure for transport has been financed over budget and budget only. It has been and seen as something of an expense rather than as an investment. That has also limited our access to different finance models and has also limited the way we have been able to finance infrastructure up till now. The question is, can we support this way in the future? When we look at Finland today, we see that our road network is deteriorated in a way which is beyond acceptable. And we have also seen that we cannot say that we have on our infrastructure a guaranteed service level. How can we do that better? How can we do that in a different way? How can we make sure that the infrastructure is an investment? And how can we make sure that infrastructure can also provide a return on its investment? How can we find models where the data that our infrastructure already today is providing can create new sources of income or return on capital? Can we create also models where we can see that we are coming away from the typical way of taxation in transport? Can we have different kinds of user pays models that are not connected to the way we are using road tolls today? What are the different solutions, and how can we make sure that when we speak about mobility, we speak about the mobility that could be seamless within the Nordic countries? And can we find solutions on those levels? The Nordic countries have had, in many things, in many ways, different paths. In Finland, we have no road tolls at all. We have no user charges at this point. Our infrastructure is completely financed over budget. And when we are looking at our neighboring countries in the Nordics, there are already different solutions. When we look at the financial instruments that the European Union is providing, we also see that having access to those, we would actually need quite a lot to change the way that we are looking at the financial structures around infrastructure. And we would need to, first of all, have a look at see how can infrastructure become as an asset, and what kind of an asset would it then be within our thinking as a government. So these are some of the questions that we would like to address today. And we would also hope that there are different insights from our speakers that come from the different Nordic countries, and that we also can have a look and a dialogue to find if there are new possibilities that are in the way and which can be in the future of interest. In Finland, we have made some studies on infrastructure finance. We have also seen and looked at especially the telecommunications sector, where infrastructure has been a part of the finance model through the user being a part of having a service level guaranteed by access to one infrastructure by being a part or by becoming a user of an infrastructure. The question is, how can we find something similar when we are talking about roads or rails or seaways? So it has been a great pleasure for us here in Finland to think about these issues, to open up discussions. It hasn't always been easy. And today we are at the point where we'd like to benchmark, where we'd like to have an open discussion to see what we can learn from the Nordics, and can we actually, in the Nordics, create one thinking or one model, or are there different models that we can use so that we can actually have a better access to different financial instruments in the future. With these words, I would like to welcome you once again to our seminar and our discussions. I hope for a lot of good input from all of you. We are a small selected group that hopefully can have the free word and use it while we are here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Anne Berner. New ideas and best practices, that's something we need today when rethinking infrastructure funding. To find out what is going on in the world right now and what we can learn about that, we have invited 3 experts to throw light on the matter. Please welcome Professor Kim Wikström from Åbo Academy University in Finland, partner Turbori Chetkovic from Capman Infra Sweden, and CEO Ingrid Dahl Hovland from Nye Veier, Norway. Ingrid. There, over there. Welcome. You can sit down and then you are talking one at a time. Our first presentation is given by Professor Kim Wikström, who is one of the leading figures in the discussion on infrastructure investing here in Finland. He is the founder and chairman of the board of BPI Institute, that is research-based management consultancy, and they have developed a new way for identifying the optimal way to finance a specific infrastructural investment. So I suppose we will hear more about that soon. Please welcome Kim Wikström.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's really inspiring to be here today among Nordic friends and to discuss about a topic that is so important for us, as already Minister Berner outlined in her own speech. And really what I'm going to bring up in my own presentation is very much about some of the new models that we can see from other places in the world, and then also see how it could be adapted here. But if I could have the next slide. Oh, it's here. Let's see now. Oh, there we go. Yes. So the point of departure is really that we know that in the coming years we will have a quite extensive amount of infrastructure investments globally. And we also know that it will have a huge impact on the welfare of our countries, and also the competitive advantage of the companies. And also, as Minister Berner brought out, the impact on the environment is becoming even more important. So this is a big issue for the countries and the way how we do, and also that we more and more bring in new things like digitalization, new type of business model will increase the complexity. And of course, as all of you know who are experts in this area, the sad side of the story is that infrastructure investments are really suffering from a lot of cost overruns and delays in the time schedules, and also not meeting the expectations. So that's one of the challenges that we are, of course, trying to address also by finding new type of financing instruments, and then also new ways to organize them. So the challenge, and this is also now, there's a report that has been distributed also on your tables. It's a quite recently published book where we have looked into this matter. And some of the challenges that comes up there is really that infrastructure investments are getting increasingly complex. And this is also putting more pressure on us, that we cannot more see them as something that are just something that we do as individual, but they are more something where we need to look on it from a broader part of the whole society, from a more systemic perspective. And I think this is also one of the challenges that we are addressing here today. So really the thing here, even if we are here now labeling that it's about financing and so on, so it's very much about how do we actually plan our infrastructures in the future, how do we build them, and how do we manage them over the life cycle. So it's not just a question about how we create a road or renew a port or something, but it's really about the life cycle and how we can actually maximize the benefit for society. So the request that we put on these infrastructure investments is very much about coming up with models that are more sustainable and also more innovative. And that means that we need to bring in I mean, here in Finland, we are now also trying to come up with a similar model as in Sweden and Norway, with 12 years plans, and maybe more build up a more systemic view on how we do these investments, and especially also the incentives that Minister Berner brought up with new type of that the benefiters are involved also in the funding, and that we really try to put emphasis on how we can actually improve the output of the investments over its life cycle. And very interestingly also, previously we often thought that infrastructure is something that is not really a platform for innovativeness. But clearly today that's the case. I mean, it's a lot of technological innovations that we can do based on these innovations. I will bring up some examples later on in my presentations around that. There's a huge effort globally on finding new type of delivery models, because this problem with the cost overruns and so on is really a global problem. So the research efforts in finding new ways of doing delivery models is also a quite important part when we talk about the funding of this. We need to see that the government can't be the one who take the whole financial burden. That's also quite important. And one important thing that we have been looking into, and I think that these investment topics are very good for institutional investors like the pension funds. And it's quite interesting to see that Sweden is now taking a big step forward with the proposal of increasing the amount of illiquid investments among the pension funds, and it probably will come in force 2019. I think that's a very major change in the overall system here. So just a few words about a model that we have been developing. It has been originally developed by Stanford. Stanford is really the leading institution for the models that has been applied in Australia and Canada. As you know, Australia and Canada are the ones who are actually the forerunners in new type of funding structures with the private sectors. And it's a rather complex scheme that I have put up here on the screen, but I just like to point out here on the lower side, what we bring up here is that we try to create collaborative institutional investment vehicles, which means that we bring in the pension funds who do collaborative platforms, and they go directly into the investments. And in the same way, we decrease the relevance of fund managers in between. And the important mechanism that we see here is that we can create platforms with owner structures that has much more long-term incentives to be in these investments, and create them in order to continuously see that they improve the value they bring to society. And another interesting thing in this is really the upper part, where you see the process, how we can come to these new collaboratives. There are a few steps that needs to be taken. I mean, even if Australia and Canada has been brought up as some success stories, they also done their mistakes through the years, and they learn something. And it's really important to see that these collaboratives, these new models, are created together with the government and the private sector. And the formal agreements, the new collaboratives really needs to be developed as a joint effort. I think that's one of the very, very important learning. We can't bring new models and then directly start to apply and expect them to be successful. I mean, like in Sweden, the Karolinska and many other things, they are quite painful, and I mean, there's a lot of things we can learn from these projects and see how we could, both on the owner side, on the sponsor side, and also which are the parties that we involve, how can we really get the long-term involvement from them. I think these are quite essentials in this model. This model we are now also implementing into Finland, trying to, with some pilot projects, to see how we could form some of these new type of collaborative platforms. So we also have quite interesting statistics now coming around these new private and alternative fundings, and especially on the PPP side, where we can see that clearly PPPs are outperforming the traditional models, and both in what regards cost overruns, they have a lower cost overrun rate, as we can see here, and also the traditional projects are more delayed as the PPPs. So these are quite encouraging signals that we need to take into account. And this brings me to the next figure, which is quite important in that way, where you see on the left side, you see the public sector model, and then you have the alternative, which could be a PPP. And as you can see here, the base cost for a project is a little bit higher for the state, but then for the funding part, the state gets lower. I mean, money to raise money is always lower for the government if your rating is in good shape. But as you can see, it's a very small part of the overall case here, and this retained risk is really the case that we need to focus here when we look on the alternative new models, as the track record is so clear that the public funded projects have more cost overruns, and therefore in the end they are mostly a more expensive way to go. At the same time, I like to remind that this is just a very narrow view, because it's just about the investment. Then we also need to see what happens during the lifetime of this investment. And there also it's quite important to see that which are the best actors to do all these innovative things that Minister Berner brought up about these new business models, digitalization, where to put the sensors, and so on. There we also need to keep in mind. And then if you look how much of the institutional money is spent on building society today, it's really a quite low number. Australia, who's been a forerunner, few years ago, they were about 5 to 6% of the pension funds money spent on that. Globally, I think we are somewhere between 2 to 2.5, 3.5. And now it's interesting to see what happens when Sweden is changing its regulation on that part. Could that really boost and bring in some more money to the infrastructure investments? I like to sum it up with one example, which is very essential, I think, both for Finland and also for the Nordic countries. And this is an ecosystem infrastructure thing that I bring up here. So this is the in and outflows of goods and services from Finland. As you know, Finland is fully dependent on sea freight. This country can't live without this, and therefore we do a lot of efforts to keep it running. And in this whole stream, you see all the different parts that we are talking about. You both see the hardcore infrastructure with roads and ports, and you see the ships and so on. But you also see the digitalization with the autonomous ships, with the automated ports, and the smart roads, where, for example, Sweden are doing a lot of efforts. We are working here with autonomous ships. Norway are also doing quite a lot on that part. So here is a good example of something where we could really boost and both come up with global new business ideas and at the same time do a lot of benefits for our society. And this demands also that we are able to calculate the systemic value, the systemic benefit that come up. And I think this is one of the things that we still need to consider, and where we maybe could do some collaboration on Nordic level, that we could try to create impact calculations on systemic level, because this is something that is still lacking in order we are good in doing impact and benefit analysis for a single investment, but we are not really good in doing it on a systemic level. So I think there we could do some very interesting collaboration also on the Nordic part. So concluding then, what we want, at least from our point of view, is to bring in the private sector, to innovate on how the value of the infrastructure asset is maximized for the user, society, and investors during its lifetime. I think that's really one of the sticking points here. Also, the regulation for pension funds needs to be adapted, and we need to, both on research and also together with the different actors, to create new type of collaborative models for how these infrastructure investments could be done in the future. And so there are some homework to be done, but at the same time, there are already very good models that we can learn from on the international scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim Wikström. Before I give the word to the next speaker, I would like to ask you about the situation here in Finland that Minister Anne Berner was talking about. What is needed to make infrastructural projects attractive to the investors?
Well, I think the first thing is, of course, to really put emphasis on this trust and collaboration building. So we need to build trust in that this system will really make a turn, and that the political situation is so stable that we are able to do it, because it's a big effort and it's also a lot of risk involved. And then, of course, very importantly, bring in some credible projects where we can really start to build it up. And these credible projects need to have a risk profile that is acceptable also for the different actors. So I think these are some of the questions we need to address.
What do you think is the situation right now? Is the political situation stable enough?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, but I think there are some very, very good movements right now. If you look on what is done on the Ministry of Transportation now, what has already been, and also this plan to come up with a 12-year plan for infrastructure and so on. So I think, and also from a global perspective, the pressure is coming, and there is also very good evidence that now it's time to take a turn.
That's right. We will talk more about this after the presentations. But now I'm delighted to ask Turbori Chetkovic from Capman Infra to give her presentation. We will take a closer look on the deregulation of the transportation sector in Sweden, driven by international players entering the market both from Europe and Asia. Turbori Chetkovic has over 25 years of experience from leading positions within the transport, real estate and infrastructure sector. She holds the position as chairman of the board of directors at Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce in Sweden and board member of Center for Higher Ambition Leadership Europe. What can we learn from, example, Hong Kong? Tubori Chetkovits, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this distinguished meeting. I feel very honored, and I will try to take you through this in a few minutes, but later on I'm really hoping also, as the minister said in the beginning, that we will really have interaction and discussion. And thanks for the nice presentation of my CV. And as you said, I mean, I'm this really transportation infrastructure person. And I went into transportation infrastructure when it was not sexy at all, in the beginning of the 90s. But now it's really, everybody is interested in this. So I was a fast mover in that sense. My teenagers claim that I have forgotten all those skills. So let's see. Okay, so actually, as I was also introduced, I am today a partner at Capman Infra, and I would just like to present us a little bit before I shoot off here. And I'm pretty sure that all of you are a little bit familiar with Capman. And we have actually been around for quite some time, and we are really operating in the Nordic region. And what we do is in different investment areas, we are actually taking over companies and going in with both capital and knowledge and try to make them better within a certain time frame. And I would also say that we are a listed company, as you know, and we always have sustainability in focus in all our investments that we do. Here you can just see a little bit about how many portfolio companies we are holding for the time being. And also, it's actually around 30,000 people who are working in our companies. And it's also interesting that the PE company is invited to talk on a seminar like this, because when I started out in the industry, private equity didn't exist, and absolutely not in the transport sector, I would say. And you can also see that we have quite a high volume of net sales. Over the years, we actually started, we have now 28 years of experience in Finland, the Nordics, and Russia, so covering a quite big region. And you can also see the number of investments that we have been working on. And as of today, we are working within 6 core investments area, where infra is one of the newest areas where we have entered. And you can also see that we have quite a lot of investor customers that we work together with. Again, we operate globally, and you can see where we have our offices, and that's the little green-blue dots, pretty centered in this part of the world. But we also have advisory networks that are kind of spread out a little bit wider. And that is, of course, because we are looking at the market internationally and need to bring in knowledge from other regions, and also where we have our investors. And just very, very briefly, Capman Infra, as I said, it's one of the newest investment areas within Capman, and we will really go into transport, energy, and telecom. That will be our focus areas. And right now, we are a small team of 5 people with very different backgrounds, but all within these sectors, having operational background, but also M&A background and more asset management background. And we are working out of Helsinki and Stockholm, but are covering the whole Nordics. So that's just to kind of put you in the scene of where Capman is. But then if I come to the wider question that I was really also asked to talk about, I would say then from an operational perspective, Sweden was pretty early out to deregulate the transport sector. And we started that in the late 90s. And my career was that at the time I was working for the more or less only big transportation company that it was at the time, the Swedish State Railways. But it was very firm decisions taken both on a government level but also municipality levels, that the politicians and the decision makers, they wanted to develop the transportation sector. And they saw that they needed to go to other markets to actually also get the knowledge. So in many levels in Sweden, we actually traveled the globe, and we were meeting transportation companies from all over the world and welcoming them to actually come and join us to develop our transport sector. And probably one of the biggest things that happened in terms of size of an operation that was handed over was when we, being Veolia Transport, took over the metro system in Stockholm. And that was the year 2000. And I would say that was really the first metro in the world at the time that was being run by a private-owned company. And I will also come back to this later on in my presentation, because and we will also talk about that when we talk about financing infrastructure, because it was a lot about, it was not only to take over the metro and to run it, it was also really also to manage all the stakeholders. Because it was very strange that a French company would actually run the metro in Stockholm. And that had to be handled with care, and we, as an operator, really, one of our biggest jobs was also to protect actually the politicians who had taken this very brave decision. And I will actually come back to that a little bit later on when I talk. So we were early on, and we opened the whole industry. But also, we started out with actually letting out operation and maintenance contracts. And why was that so? I would say that it was a little bit easier to get through in the country, not to hand over the infrastructure assets as such. Because then it's really about ownership, and you come into these really, really long-term questions. What about in 20 years' time? Who will then own this infrastructure, and how can we control it? So we started out with transportation and operation of the transport system. But I think that in Sweden now we have we are a little bit too slow, and I can see other examples, other markets where they are quicker to actually also open up for infrastructure. And I also see a big need, as we heard also here in the beginning, that we now in the Nordics start to open up for this. Interestingly enough, because of the big opening of the market, I mean, we had for every bid on the operational side, we had between 5 and 10 bidders who were present in the country, coming from Europe and coming from Asia. And really doing a lot of effort to get into the market. And one company that I also then that I actually joined some years after my 8 years at Veolia is MTR, the Hong Kong company that was mentioned in the beginning. And that is an interesting case to look at when you look at about how a transportation company actually can do. And also what we wanted to kind of import to the Swedish model was really that a transportation company can actually also invest in infrastructure. And the way that the metro and train system in Hong Kong has been developed over the years is actually that every sequence that they have built of new rails, on top of the rails, they have built houses, they have built shopping centers, etc. And that is the way to finance the rails when you kind of build it. And this is a model that I think is really, really interesting to look at. And obviously MTR, I mean, both when I was there, but also after I left, this is a model that is something that MTR would like to see in many of the Nordics, in the Nordics. I also wanted to just say a little bit about what I think has been good with the opening up of competition and with the also mixing of different competencies. I think that we wouldn't have had the customer focus that we do have in the transportation sector in Sweden if we hadn't opened up for competition. And competition is good. It's just to go to yourself. I mean, if you have somebody, at least the majority of us, or maybe I'm talking too much out of myself, but if you have somebody to compete a little bit, you do a little bit better. And we have seen in Sweden that customer satisfaction rates has gone up, profitability in the whole industry has gone up, and we have actually, coming back to the minister's point, we have seen a lot of innovation. Not enough, but we have seen more innovation than we would have seen if we hadn't had competition. And I also talked about this. I mean, the international players who have entered the scene and who want to enter the scene, and we also saw from your studies that there is a lot of capital who really want to engage in the infrastructure. And we don't only get the money, we actually also get the knowledge. And there have been so many initiatives in all our markets, I mean, in the Nordics, trying to actually add more capital. And we have seen some examples in the transport sector, we have seen it in the energy sector, but I think we can all agree that we need to see it more. Because we have, I mean, in Sweden, we sometimes use a word that some people like and others don't like, but I think it's kind of describing the situation. I like to talk about that we have an infrastructure deficit. We have not invested enough in our infrastructure. We should have been investing more because we are actually holding back the societies where we are living because we don't have enough with infrastructure. And I can understand that it's difficult, especially when it actually comes to investments, to be brave enough to actually formulate the models. But I think we have to. And I think that we should look at all the good examples that we have. And we also heard here, for example, that Karolinska is one model that has been tried. And I think maybe all of us in the Nordics know about the hospital in Stockholm. I would say from my end, it's maybe a little bit too early to evaluate it because it has just started. I don't have any deep knowledge about it. But I guess one big problem was when you tender something, you should never buy if you only have one tender. I mean, it's just to go to yourself. If you are going to rebuild your house and you need a new roof, are you just asking the price from one constructor? How do you know then that you get the right quality and get the right price? So I guess my point on this is that we should not use the bad examples, if this is now a bad example we will see, to hinder us to go forward. I think instead we should look at the good examples and we should look on a wider geography than ours, what we can actually do. And I think it's extremely key that we actually allow private and public capital to work together. It doesn't have to be either or. And it's also a little bit coming back to what the minister said in the beginning. It's also, when we look at infrastructure, we should be a little bit more brave, we should be a little bit more open-minded and see how we actually can combine things. I think a lot of us, I don't know why, but it's easy to think in these kind of, you know, separate stuprör, I don't know what that is in English. Silos, thank you. It's easier to think and look into the different silos instead of thinking over. When you start to think over the silos, that is when innovation is starting. So it's both looking broader sense, not saying I'm working with transport, the real, you know, the heavy infrastructure, the trains and boats and buses and the airports, and I work with telecom, for example. It's more to see how can we combine it, and how can we actually get influences from really, really new industries, from the startup sectors. Why are the startup sectors not so much present, for example, in transport? I mean, okay, then take a look around and see what can you find around the corner. But it's also about not being afraid of mixing private and public capital. We have some really, really good examples of it, but I would like to see more of that. And I just give you one very concrete example, because I have an airport up here. I also had the pleasure to be the CEO of Swedavia Swedish Airports for quite some years before joining CapMan. And we actually did this on a smaller scale, but we did it under the radar because it was not really allowed to do. So, for example, we started to build our airport cities around the 3 big airports. We were we did partnership agreements with the builders because we hadn't built hotels or office buildings. We didn't know how to specify the house that we needed. So that was one good thing. We got all the private knowledge, and we were also sharing the risk about, for example, a hotel. And we built it on time and on the money. And if somebody above me would have understood what I was planning to do, maybe I would have been stopped because it could have been sensitive. I don't know. But then also we moved on and we sold these hotels and offices because I saw somebody else here in the airport sector. I mean, it has been a fantastic development. More and more people are traveling. We travel, massively because of the low-cost airlines coming in and getting us better prices, etc., and we are being more global. But also, we needed then a lot of money to finance, the real infrastructure for an airport, like new runways and new terminals. So then we sold off these hotels and offices that we really don't need. It's not core, and we could get in a lot of money from pension, for example, pension players, etc. And then we could ship in the money into asphalt, so to say. So it's also just one example of how you actually can do and not being afraid of mixing and not getting stuck in old models. And then again, to sum this up, I mean, stakeholder management, I could talk for hours about that, because we all know when we do changes, to manage stakeholders, you can have the best idea in the world, you can have the best business plan ever invented, but if you don't manage all your stakeholders, your idea can be killed and it can be attacked. And how many politicians hasn't been forced to leave their positions because of brave decisions? If we look in the history, I couldn't do a long list of that. And that's really also it takes strong leaders. It does. And it's more difficult today in the political context not to find strong people, but to find strong majorities, because we all know how it goes in the elections. So I think that we as business people, we should work even tighter together with the politicians and understanding the situation. It is actually not so easy to stand there when the wind is blowing. And I think you know all what I mean. And then finally, in Sweden, we have not been very good in taking in, to actually take in private capital to invest in infrastructure. And Mrs. Berner had very good examples of that. We treat investment costs like an expense, which is just crazy if you think about it, I'm sorry. So we are a group of people who are now working together with IVA, the Royal Swedish Society, to actually set up a project not to investigate how we should find alternative procurement and financing models, because we have so many investigations, we can yet pile them up, but more to actually use some concrete cases in Sweden right now and just do it, I would say, Stefan. And we are just now shopping for money for this project, and I have the honor to be a senior advisor to IVA, which I'm really glad of being. So I can now see that I have used more than my time. Just to leave you with this. This is a fantastic industry, and we have so many challenges and opportunities in front of us. This would be my kind of 3 takeaways from my 25 years in this, and I'm happy to continue to discuss later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Tubori Chetkovic. I know that this question can be very difficult to answer, but still I would like to know if you could bring one solution from Hong Kong to Sweden, or why not Finland, what would that be?
That would actually be to construct transportation systems the way that they do in Hong Kong. I mean, when you develop a railway system, for example, you you're using very valuable land. So just make sure that you actually use the value creation that this train line will, you know, the value creation that will happen with this piece of land that wasn't maybe not so valuable, and paying the railway system while you are then building commercial, how to say, real estate buildings or apartments. To actually, because today when we, for example, let's take a metro system, when you build it today, the ones owning the land are not part of the value creation to the extent that actually will come afterwards. And I know that this is very difficult to do. It's difficult to calculate. There are initiatives in Sweden from the government side who are looking at it. I understand it is difficult, but I think for the benefit of our society moving forward, I think we should try, I mean, continue to try. Yeah, that would be one thing.
Sounds interesting. Let's come back to this during the discussion after the next presentation. But now we take a closer look on Norway, where they had a successful toll practice for more than 10 years. What will happen in Norway in the future? Our next speaker is CEO Ingrid Dahl Hovland from Nye Veier. The company's activities include planning, construction, operation and maintenance of all major highways in Norway, and it is owned by the government. We will hear about financing and the execution model of Nye Veier. Ingrid Dahl Hovland, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And for good presentations, the previous good presentations. I will give you a presentation of the model we have in Norway, running since 1st of 1st, 2016. And as said, the company is owned by the government, and I will like to point out two of the articles from the association, the clause number 3, the purpose of the company is very strong for us. And it is to plan, construct, and operate and maintain new core road network and highly focused on traffic safety. That's important for us. And the sections of highways in our portfolio with high net benefits is to be prioritized before the distances with lower cost net benefit. So it's extremely important for us to always use the cost-benefit analysis to do the prioritization. We are fully owned by the government. Those are the different agencies in the Ministry of Transportation in Norway. And there are 4 different companies where Nye Veier is one of the companies. There was a framework agreement with the Parliament approval, final decision, which is the backbone in the company. It's a broad political target for the company. And we have 3 different framework agreements with our ministry. It's the planning services, it's the road construction planning, the agreement, and the road operations. The scope is predefined in the frame agreement, and it is all in all 482 kilometers from the road administration put into this company. And the funding for the portfolio is 156 billion Norwegian kroner, which is, you can divide on 10 to get the euros. We are today 145 employees, and we have now, all in all, 20 billion Norwegian kroner in construction, and 21 billions are now in competition on the way out in the market. And next year, we will open the 2 first distances. You can see the different parts on the map. It's European roads. It will give the 4-line highway roads from Oslo to Kristiansand. which is European Road 18, and from 4 lines from Kristiansand to Stavanger, which is European Road 39. And north of Oslo, you have the part along Mjøsa, which is European Road 6, and north and south of Trondheim. So those are the 482 kilometers divided into 12 distances, which are prioritized after cost-benefit socio-economical terms. The red markets are the distances which are prioritized and are under construction, and the pink ones are those who will come next. In addition to 482 kilometers and 156 billions, we had 20 years as the period where we should finalize the portfolio. This is the model we have based on the funding for the company. We have, every 4 years, we have a turnaround in the ministry, and it's 20 billions divided on 4 years for the governmental funding. These are based on a fixed price agreement that we make for each distance, which are prioritized and will be put into production. On top of that, we had the toll road funding. And this is, it differs a bit in the portfolio. It's a bit more than 30% in all, but from, I think the lowest distance is 28%, and we are above 50 on one of the distances. So this is approval from the regional authorities that leads up to the final parliament decision when we start to build. And this gives us a very strict limitation of liquidity, and we have to work hard to have a good cost control and good plan for the time schedules. So this is a very strong limitation for us, and we have to work very hard with the cost control, and of course the risk and opportunities. The next slide shows you how we run the toll road funding in Norway. It's always based on the parliament decision, which is based on the regional approval on the taxes. And we have now 5 different toll road companies in Norway. It's limited to the construction, and you cannot cross-subsidiate different distances. And it's an arrears collection, and we have 5 companies, as said. The model as it is a very strong model and driving force in the company to have a good portfolio governance. And it's extremely important for us in Nye Veier to really operate under this strong liquidity performance as it requires from us. We have to use a lot of effort to have good analysis, good risk management, and really simulate the portfolio every month for the next coming years, for this year, and have a very good cost control. A good cost control, good risk management gives us the opportunity to give us more freedom and more freedom of degrees up front. We have no long-term debt financing, and we have not still private-public partnership in our funding. And the toll road companies gives us the funding per long-term facilities. And there is a risk-sharing model between the company and the toll road companies. This is the model. It's quite complex, but we have tried to simplify it as much as possible. It is the liquidity model with all in all the 5 billion per year and the toll road funding in addition that gives us the liquidity and what we can build for. If we have cost overruns or time schedule problems, it means that we have to postpone another project. We have no place to send a cost overrun. So for us, this leads to a very strong incentive to have a good cost control and good control over the time schedule. The figure beneath the liquidity model shows the 12 stretches that we prioritize after a cost-benefit model in the company. So we start to work to see how much we could increase the socioeconomic and the benefits for the end user. And in addition, we try to reduce the costs as much as possible. And in the model, to work both with the benefits for the end user and the society and the cost reduction is really meaningful, because you can never reduce the costs, so you lose on the benefit side for the end user. But to get the project as far as possible up in the planning value chain, and we use then value chain modeling in the early stage of the project to see how to do this and how to do this in the best way for the end user and the society. To simplify, to do it more robust, and to get a good control over the cost and the plan and the benefit for the end user. And that is the governance model we have built in the company. And how we do this is to have long distances and to work with the plans over a long distance. So we have a fixed price with the government when we start a new project. And we share 10% up or 10% down during the period with the funding company. But of course, if we have cost overruns, that means that we have to postpone other projects in the portfolio. And if we are able to reduce the costs, we will get more flexibility, and we can also then start other projects earlier. So that gives us the good flexibility to give more back to the society earlier. So the model itself gains incentives to improve and avoid cost overruns. So this is the governance model we have built up, and we have been working hard to get long distances. The last one is 70 kilometers, and then we work quite hard in early stage to have a good contract strategy, to divide it in, to work with the corridor, and to take out how much we can in the early stage. And in the governance model, we have to see the 20% down before we start and are running into the market. So we do not leave anything to the market. The market price can differ a lot, and we can see it, especially in this period, when we have a high pressure on the capacity in Norway. So the governance model has been important for us, and it was developed the first year when the company was running. I have two examples how we work. We have in Trondheim, we have north and south of Trondheim, we have been worked hard with can we increase the benefit for the end user, and how can we reduce the costs. We do it mainly through route optimization, shorter bridges and tunnels. Tunnels and bridges are expensive constructions. A bridge is 6 times a normal road. Fewer junctions, or not more junctions that you keep the benefit for the end user. We have also been able to higher the speed limit. Mass balance, we use the industry to get a good mass balance in the project, and also, of course, use of technology and innovation. So all in all, we have reduced the cost from 28 to 23 billions, and we have also a good benefit increase for the end user, mainly both on cost reduction, but also on time limit. We have 110 kilometers on this on both of those distances. This is another example along north of Oslo. So just to show where we have gained lower cost and kept the benefit for the end user. It's mainly on the scope, the contract strategy, which is extremely important for us on the longer distances, but also on the project and construction management, internal administration, and also land acquisitions. So it's to have good analysis and show how to do it and where to do it, and keep the benefit is important. All in all, you talked about to be brave, but it's all in all for us it has been about values. And we have 3 core values in the company. It's to innovate, it's to improve, and it's to assure. To innovate, we mean that we need people in this company that have the stayer, are able to stay and be challenging all the time. For the most we have done so far has been process innovation, and not all of them are friendly out there. It's a lot of different interests, so you have to have a good stayer attitude. And to think improvement every day. How do I bring value to this project? How do I bring value to the society? And really live this out. And make sure that you do it for every day. We are transparent, we are serious, and we do it in the best way for the end user. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid Dahl Hovland. One difficult question to you as well. If you were asked to give one advice to Finland about infrastructural financing, what would that be?
To think the model, because we have been able and we have been lucky that we have a model that we see that we can strengthen even more in our governance model. So try to get good spiral all the time so you gain new results. That is important. Think a robust and good model is the best. And also one thing in additional that was mentioned of 2 of you in the previous presentations, it has been extremely important for us to have the whole value chain from planning, construction to maintenance. But also now to have the mobility and the information that you will gain in the traffic is take care of that.
It's actually something you are working with, the model.
Absolutely, yeah, that's true. And this is really what we try now also to see that it's very much goes not only from the construction phase, but very much about how you continuously can improve the value and the output. And this happens very much through this new type of technology like digitalization and so on, where you can really do the analytics in real time and you can really find the right ways when you do maintenance, and you can price the lanes in different ways and so on. So there's quite an interesting things how we can really boost the usage of infra.
Sounds good, thank you. And thank you all for very interesting presentations. Now we have time for the discussion, and you are all welcome to join with questions. Just raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. And remember to introduce yourself before asking. Use your expertise. Is there somebody who wants to start right now? Let's wait for a while and then come back to the questions from the audiences. When we are waiting, I suggest that we continue a while about Norway. Ingrid, how important do you think that the toll praxis has been for the Norwegian transport system in the whole? How did it change the system?
Yeah, it has for a long time been a possibility to gain competence into how we do it. It's a new model, and of course, when you go into a new model, you want to create something more. You want to really show that we are able to do this in a better way. So, and the willingness to pay in Norway for new roads are quite high on private, because we can see in our portfolio we differs from 28 to even over 50%. But the people, they really want the new road to get strong regions, to have to shorten down the transportation time and so on. So it is, I think it was you that mentioned it, it is really important to develop regions, to develop a country.
What do you think? Do you think Finland should start to use tolls? Nobody wants to answer that. I know it's a very difficult question. But what about the future? Would new infrastructure be built in Norway without toll financing?
I think in Norway, it's other persons that are better to answer that than me, but I think this is a well-established system today. And we have now also have a restructuring of the system that we have fewer companies. Earlier it was one company per distance. So, and also with our model, we can see that it's to develop the regions, the southern part. So we have the TNT network well established in Norway within 15 years or something. So it is, and I think also the trust is very, people believes that this is a way to do it faster, and we will then get new roads. And we had the election last year, and it was a lot of discussion around our company, but it was for a period, and so now it's a good model.
Any questions from the audience? In Sweden, the congestion charge has been successful. Can you tell more about that, Tuulborg?
Yeah, I think that was very controversial when it was first, the discussion came up. But I think, alongside with that decision, we also, or the PTAs, they also put in more resources in the public transport system. So it was actually more buses, for example, running.
Yeah.
So I think in the sense of people today, it's really a no question. When I was then running the metro on behalf of, I think it was Veolia at the time, and we actually then took up the discussion, why can't we have a peak pricing system in public transport? I mean, and obviously that was a little bit shocking to put on the market, but if you think about it, I mean, if you go to Greece, it's much cheaper to fly there when the schools has started, and in that sense you can kind of take out the capacity. And I think the only reason why we were lifting the question was kind of, to try to get in new thinking. And in Stockholm, to take that as an example today, I mean, we still, we don't debate the congestion charges. I think what you said also, people understand that it is a cost to it, but I think what we could do better jointly in the debate is really also to kind of, in a simple way, explain the cost of not making these investments and not being too complicated, not being too academic, put it in a language that everybody can understand, because it is a hidden cost, and I'm sure it's the same here or in Norway, but as soon as we have a problem with a bridge or something, then somebody is calculating how many hours we are sitting there and waiting. But we need to link the discussion, and that is also to help. I'm looking at Mrs. Berner now, but it's a little bit unfair, but to support the politicians also in their efforts,
Yeah, they are very difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, and I should also just, when we talk about, I think your example is extremely good, and you said, it's still state money there. But I mean, you have to crawl before you can run. So I think you did it exactly the way that the public could take at the time. But I also think we have a debate in Sweden now that where they say, some people say that we can't let in private money, and why should we do that in infrastructure? Because the state can always borrow cheaper, and that is correct, but also what you talked about, and also what we are looking at on the EVA project, or are hoping to look at, is also, it's also a risk factor in it, because you have to look at the whole thing. It's not just that you borrow the money for a certain cost. It is also how can you jointly, who is taking what kind of the part of the risk, and how can we jointly make sure that we end up where we should be at the right time and at the right cost.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Ingrid, you wanted to say something.
Both of the previous presentators had said that it's something also about the model we use to serve the political political decisions. And when we looked into and started to work with the socio cost-benefit analysis, it was it was used different from consultant to consultant, and it was not robust enough to use for the to discuss in the society and the political environment. And that is also something that is important, that we have good models, that we, yes, it is like that. It's 27, it's 20/80, 30/70, but it do not have to be 100% when you discuss these models. But it's extremely important to, what does it mean that you give this way, this road to the society or the region 10 years before? What does that exactly mean? We have to have better models and analysis on the social benefits.
Kim Wikström, what can we learn from public-private partnership projects already implemented in the Nordics? What do you think?
Well, I think there has been not that many, of course, of them and so on, but of course there are both encouraging and maybe some more stressful experiences. And I think one of the, not only looking at the Nordic, but generally looking on these major or these mega projects that we have more and more in infrastructure. So one of the things that we are quite concerned about is about the owner's role. And to have a strong owner in that, because I mean, even if you have a good model and if you don't have someone who is taking care of the strategy, the visions and so on, it may fail. And it's really a question about the overall structures, and we can't just give away a national priority to a group of actors without being somehow involved. And I think this is really one of the key questions we have to work still on, how to find this interplay, and also what I brought up in my presentation, that when we now move over to this new type of financing, which will happen clearly, so we have to do our homework together with all these actors, and we have to pay a lot of attention to the role of the sponsor and how that interaction actually takes place, and who is actually carrying the task of the vision and taking the big picture and all these analytics and how it connects to society as such.
What do the investors think about the owner's role?
I think that from an investor perspective, I mean, we really want to take responsibility. And we do understand, as you say now rightly, I mean, especially when it comes to an infrastructure asset. I mean, after the contract is kind of over, because you need to have some kind of limit, it's really important to have a creative dialogue in the beginning. You know, what will happen when we kind of hand back the infrastructure asset? And but being open and transparent with each other, I think you can find very good models, and there are models out there where you can, because what you want to do is that you want to safeguard that this infrastructure asset will be kind of provided for, you know, for a very, very long time, so that the society can benefit. And I think when you look at the investor as a collective, I mean, an entity, I mean, more and more also the discussion is really, really sincere about how can we as investors really contribute to a sustainable society. How can we create models? Because we all understand that that is the way to go. And I think that has emerged quite a lot the last 10 years. And of course, as we heard also from the beginning, fueled by the problems with the environment. So I think, I mean, thinking about this for a while, I would say that the differences between the different stakeholders, I kind of see it a little bit positive. They are smaller, they are diminishing because we are more focusing on the long-term goal jointly. That's my view, having had the benefit to be in different pools, so to say.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, please. We need one microphone here over there.
When you mentioned the airport, you work for private interest and actors to take part in the development. I think that was very interesting. How do you motivate them to innovate and do they take part of the risk in these innovations that they give? And that is related to the other question now, when you yourself are an investor. What kind of risks do you like to take part in? What kind of risks do you like less?
Okay. On the first question, coming back to the airport, what we could show our partners was that we aviation was a growing market, and that airport cities is something that we see in other markets and that actually could be successful here. So if you work together with us, on this, you can actually use it as a shopping window for other possibilities. So I think we had a very open discussion with them. And we were sharing the risk, we were sharing the profits, but also we created a very good climate, so we were kind of all of us sitting in the same boat. And I remember for the first hotel that we did build, we had a target date of the 15th of November. And of course, nobody of us wanted to be late or to have to come back, in my case, to the board and say, I'm sorry, but the costs went up with 20% because of the weather or because of whatever. So I think it was really to create an atmosphere of collaboration. And also, showing this is the first hotel that we are building. Then we had a master plan for the big airports in this case, saying, this is what we are going to build in terms of hotels, offices, runways, terminals, and who doesn't want to be part of that, connecting Sweden with the world. So it was a kind of a joint vision in that case. And then coming to your second question, talking about risks. And that is always, how should I say, it's really connected to each case. And you need to have a good understanding, because a good understanding of the business that you do enter into. To just take the case where I'm working now, when we are looking at the infrastructure objects, then in our team and in CapMan at large and with the advisors that we have connected to us, we actually create quite a good knowledge about the assets that we are looking at. Because what we try to do then is, by understanding the business better, we can then reduce the risks. But no, you can use one-liner for what I just said and say you want predictability in a changing world where a lot of things are being turned upside down. So of course you want as much predictability as possible. And that's probably where I'm working now. It's more difficult for us to calculate, for example. I don't say that we will never do it, but it's more difficult to maybe calculate a PPP project and the risk, because it's a greenfield project and you need to put up the risks. But having said that, again, there can always be models. So I guess that goes for all of us. We want to have as much knowledge as possible so that we can actually discuss the risks we can quantify them, and we can put actions on them to prevent them from happening. I don't know if that was a good answer to your question.
I think it was.
Oh, you are nodding at least. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's writing, so I think it was a very good.
I mean, risk is one of my favorite subjects. So I could, I mean, because of the kind of activities that I've been working with, it's something that you have in your head all the time, you know. And from an investor perspective, when you go in, as you said, you know, you do it for a long term. How can you? Yes, the final quote, and how can you also, towards your customers, I mean our investors, how can you actually protect their money? Because actually we are working on behalf of our customers, where I am now.
We will now finish the first session of the seminar, and as a last question to you all, I would like to hear, we have soon ministers sitting on the chairs, and I would like to hear what you wish from each minister. We start with Kim Wikström. One wish to the ministers, the Nordic ministers.
Well, I think that I already brought up in my presentation one of the wishes, and that's really to work on the regulation for the institutional investors, and really to somehow bring up then this that also from the minister's side, open-minded, find credible projects which actually opens up for a learning experience, a learning path for bringing in these new models, because I think this is quite critical. We are all working in comfort zones always, and there are lock-ins in our systems, and of course we need help. And there's a very interesting theoretical thoughts about the entrepreneurial state, and I think the entrepreneurial state says that sometimes we need the ministers to take the front run, and this is really the place where we are right now. So that's probably my wish in large.
Good. And Ingrid, your wish.
Yes, digitalization has been mentioned, and how to get care of all the information that will be along the highways in the future. But it's one other thing that just was mentioned in the beginning from the minister here, that was the climate challenge. And what we can see in our model is that what is good business for the climate in the future to reduce the CO2 emission is also good for the costs. So to work with material to reduce the material use through the construction period, and also of course when we are drifting away. But this is something to create the opportunity for the future to good business models, and it's something that also is important to simplify enough so we know when we do the do the måler. Yeah, when you reduce the CO2 footprint, for instance, we know how to put actions behind it and create good business models for it.
That's right. And Torborg.
Thanks for inviting us, and continue to do that. And we just want to be part of this fantastic journey. So please let us, and really to combine the skills that we are all having together, and no more investigations. I think we should just go ahead and do some pilot projects at high speed, because I think the citizens in our countries, they deserve it.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, everyone, for a very informative and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I think it's time to move forward and invite the big bosses up on the stage. Next, we will take a look into the future. What have we learned about infrastructural financing so far, and how can we make it work better? Is there possibilities for cooperation between the countries? Please welcome Ketil Solvik-Olsen, Minister of Transport and Communications, Norway. Sigurdur Ingi Johansson, Minister of Transport and Local Government, Iceland. and Ola Nordlander, Director General, Head of Department for Housing and Transport, Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation, Sweden. And Anne Berner, Minister of Transport and Communications, Finland. We will first hear a short presentation about the current situation in each country, Norway, Sweden, Iceland and Finland, and after that we will open the discussion for all of you. And we start with Norway. Please welcome Ketil Solvik Olsen.
Thank you. Well, dear ministers and dear friends, I'm delighted to be here to present what's happening in Norway, trying to give an overview on how we approach the matter of infrastructure and also what we're trying to do to improve how we spend taxpayers' money and how we can make the projects work better. And we are kind of attacking the issues somewhat differently in the different sectors of infrastructure. I'm talking about roads, railroads, harbors, and aviation. Of course, the issue of digitalization covers all of this. And we do a lot of, I think, exciting things. Some that we worked well with together with Finland, some where we look more to Sweden, Denmark, and I think the Nordic approach here is important for all of the countries. When we discuss infrastructure in Norway, we do have a 12-year plan that we rotate every 4 years. So the plan now is from 2018 until 2029. We are already working on rotating it, so preparing it for the next discussion in Parliament in 2021. It's underway. So we're both trying to look into the future. At the same time, we're trying to make sure that the projects that are within at least the 4-year period or the 6-year period now, that we actually manage to build those and run the infrastructure the best possible. The idea with the plan is to try to look into the future. What kind of transportation needs do we have? Both looking at how do we think industry will evolve, how will business evolve, where will people live, where do we want people to live, but we should not force them to move somewhere, but we should still make sure that infrastructure in the cities make them, well, make them able to live without owning or driving a private car every day, you know, building mass transit, walking, biking. But in the rural areas, the car will be kind of the mode of transportation. So finding the balance between building roads, building mass transit, improving the rails, it's important. Having this approach, what do we need to build, what do we need to maintain, what kind of new services will evolve because of new kind of vehicles or new technology improving our decision making, that's probably the toughest job. Because just expanding on what we already have, it's easy, but do we actually know that building the next stretch of the same road is actually what the society needs, or are we going to move in completely different direction 12 years from now? We really don't know, but we have to make educated guesses. We do have a picture when I travel around and doing presentations in Norway that shows a picture from Fifth Avenue in New York in the 1900 and 1913, showing horses and then cars. And if we now prepare for just more horses, we're going to miss what's happening. But in that sense, are we now in 1905, where this is only a few years away, or are we actually still in 1850? Where preparing for the automobile is kind of way too early, so you're also making wrong investments. We do strongly believe in digitalization, that autonomy will be kind of one of the key factors within how we move. So we do believe in being forward-leaning when it comes to technology. What's important, though, is when prioritizing this, what to do is that it helps our different kind of road commission, railroad folks, harbor folks on what to plan for. You can't plan everything at once. You need to focus on different projects and help them maintain order. But I think what we also need to work on is exactly how do we finance this. because we have had a lot of plans in Norway. In 1963, the government put forward a really nice motorway plan or highway plan. If you look how many of those roads were actually completed, very few. And of those who were completed, they were usually completed as two-line highways, not four-line highways. Something that we thoroughly regret today, because we have to go back and improve on roads that we finished maybe just 15, 20 years ago, making it a lot more expensive in a generational perspective than building the right capacity when you started. Also, we often ended up building 2, 4, 6, 8 kilometers at a time instead of 20, 40, 60 kilometers at a time, meaning that the project management costs have been much higher than they need to be. You move around equipment, you have project organizations that could really plan for long stretches, but because of the way we finance with annual budgets and stuff, the overall overhead costs have become really too high. When we then look at how do we finance this, when we approached office in 2013 after the election, we kind of noticed that in the aviation industry, we have a government-owned company running about 40 of the Norwegian airports. Then we have 4 or 5 airports that are privately owned, meaning it's usually local government owning them, even though it's not state government. We don't have to subsidize the aviation industry at all. We do buy some routes from some of the airports because we want them to serve the rural areas, but we don't have to subsidize the airports itself. We do have a system where the government owns airports that make money is internally subsidizing those who don't make money, but I don't make the decision. The board of the aviation company or they make the decisions what to invest in, at what time, and at what capacity. To me, that means that as long as you have customers pay for what they use, and you then have the company having the revenue, even though it's a state company, as long as they can decide how to spend the revenue and also have the mentality then that if we improve infrastructure here, we may increase traffic, meaning more revenue, and we keep the revenue ourselves and invest in more, then this system is working. People don't complain too much about aviation costs. Even though everybody wants something to be for free, ideally, they accept that, well, we do have to pay. And they see that the prices here are actually lower compared with many other mass transit costs that you incur during your life. So the incentive structure here for the aviation company, or airport company I should call them, to keep costs down, because that can generate more projects, generating more revenue, generating more investments again. It works. When we look at the railroad and the road infrastructure, you don't have this connection between income and how much you can invest. On roads, or to start with railroads, on railroads, we spend a lot more money on the railroads than the revenue they generate. We have to subsidize tickets with 3-4 billion kroner every year, and we have to pay for all infrastructure costs. So you do generate some revenue from ticket sales. It goes directly to the railroad company owning or providing the service, but paying for the infrastructure is pretty much zero. So from a societal point of view, from a budget point of view as a minister, the railroad is a big expense for us. At the same time, it's an expense that we're willing to incur because it does help us move traffic in and out of the cities and cargo on long hauls. But it's an expense for us. Trying to look at how Hong Kong has done this, how to get the incentive that the customer is actually an income base for you and not just an expense. That's some of the mentality we try to change. We have reformed the whole railroad sector, generating a lot of complaints from kind of the left side of Norwegian politics because they don't believe in kind of the market thinking, because they kind of have the idea that, of course, everybody is already doing the best they can. So just having the profitability perspective into this is just draining government of money unnecessary, because if you have a completely public or one entity railroad system, it will generate exactly the same service to people. What we do see, though, is that we managed to change the mentality, the incentive structure, where you actually now look at the passenger more as an income base, not just as an expense. Trying to see how we can develop the areas around the big railroad stations to generate commercial revenue to help finance what's happening. That's some of the kind of stages we're now into. We managed to make the railroad infrastructure owner have 4-year contracts when it comes to maintenance, not just 1-year budget. Because, and they say that makes us possible, or it's possible now for us as a railroad infrastructure owner to work more with the contractors on making better use of equipment, keeping costs down, and having a more long-term relationship. So again, just changing the way we budget, having 4-year budgets for the maintenance, can improve the kind of service we get from the private enterprise market. We still have a long way to go here, but I think we're moving things in the right direction. When it comes to the road, it's the other way around when it comes to how much do people pay and what do they get back. We say in Norway that kind of the car has been kind of a milk cow for the government. You tax it when you buy it, when you use it, when you own it, and now, because of the toll road, you tax it also when you drive it. So you tax both the gasoline and diesel, and then you tax it when you're actually on the road. Now, do bear in mind that my approach to explaining the toll road will be a little bit different than Ingrid, because I represent a party that don't like the toll road, because I don't like to be milked by the government. So I don't mind paying my way for my infrastructure, but I do mind paying 2 or 3 or 4 times for the same service. And therefore, that's kind of my motivation into making sure that we increase the government spending on infrastructure, both because I think it's a good investment for the country, but also because I want to kind of even out the balance on how much I as a motorist pay into the government and how much I get back. So I have a kind of double incentive here to deal with this. Do bear in mind also that, am I out of time?
Yes.
Well,
but we are used to that.
I'm used to that also.
You're a politician.
Yeah.
I mean.
So if I can, and being a minister, can I have just a few more minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Do bear in mind also that the big thing with Nye Veier, we still have the National Public Road Administration. They do have most of the road responsibility. But what we have given to Nye Veier is the long stretches where we do want to have 4-lane highways. It doesn't mean that the Public Road Administration have no 4-lane highways, but this is our kind of project, seeing if we start fresh, if we give some more freedom to make decisions in the system instead of having everything go through the politics, will we get more bang for the buck? And what I think Ingrid didn't tell you clearly enough is that, yes, she has a 20-year perspective on what she's doing. She has a fixed financing from what's coming from the government, 5 billion Norwegian kroner per year. And she has a fixed thing when it comes to how much toll she can collect total. She is not allowed to just increase toll if she wants to. This is set. What she does have the freedom to do, though, is that within those 20 years, she makes her own decisions, which part of, or which road to build first. As a politician, I would love for her to build my road first. Of course, that would be great in my home area. But I have an arm's length distance to her, so if she chooses to build that as the last project, I will just accept it. Because I believe that we can tell the voters that, look at what she's doing, because she is not going to finish this in 20 years. The projection she has usually is that she'll finish this in 12 years. And she's going to overall save us 20% compared with what we expected this to cost. And I think most people will say, okay, well, then I will kind of settle and be patient, because I know that overall as a society, we are going to get more infrastructure for my taxpayer. for tax money, and even though my road is not going to be the first one, I'm still going to trust the system. Not everybody's going to be like that. We have doubled the investment in maintenance, for instance, but if people don't see their road being paved now, it means that nothing has changed in 5 years. You'll find people like that as well. But I think the important thing here is that giving freedom to those in the government, companies, agency, whatever you want to call them, to actually make decisions and be professionals. And for us, giving the overall message, what do we want to achieve, but then keeping the professionals and give them the responsibilities and also how to handle the money, it's important. And I think what's different here with the National Public Road Administration is that there's a lot higher expectation that I, as a politician, should go in and discuss each and every project they work on. Every time there's an intersection that somebody wants, they expect me to go in and fix it. Of course, that's a lot tougher administration work for the Public Road Administration than it is for Nye Veier, where I just say that, hey, they make the decisions. If you want to have them influence them, you have to go and talk to them. Also, the other part is that when they save money, I don't have a treasury department come and say, hey, you saved money, we want them back in the tax coffin to prioritize them as fresh money. You keep them. And that means that you have an incentive to work with local politicians on keeping costs down, because that means that the next stretch on the same road can come earlier. While in the traditional way of building this, there's no incentive for that. Because if you actually get your project through Parliament, then you can kind of just add all your wishes and desires. Because you know they're not going to cut it, because the political cost of cutting a project that you have decided is too high. So I guess also, I believe that we have changed the incentive structure for the local politicians to now help save money, because they know that you get more road, while before it was just add all your pork barrel spending to it, because you know that they won't cut it. But overall, you get less road for this. So having looked at what we managed to achieve over time with the aviation industry, I think has also influenced us how we're doing this with roads and railroads. We are not yet there where we can show all the results for the railroads, but I think Nye Veier is showing that it kind of bold decisions are paying off. And I think maybe the best thing of what we have done is not necessarily saving 30 billion kroner in Nye Veier, but it's also changing the mentality in the National Public Road Administration. Because now you can compare their projects to Nye Veier's projects, and then you have a positive competition. You're being measured, and I think being measured is the best way of making sure that you improve. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the toll praxis sounds quite good as a citizen. Thank you, Minister Ketil Solvik-Olsen. We are moving forward to Iceland. We turn our eyes to Iceland. Please welcome Minister Sigurdur Ingi Johansson. The stage is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. In Iceland, we stand for 2 or 3 challenges. We don't have the problem with the railroads because we have no trains. It was a good talk from my Norway colleague about the aviation, and I could talk about that today, but I'm particularly going to talk about the roads and how we finance the roads, because that's the biggest issue we are standing for. After the bank crisis, the economic crisis, now 10 years ago, we put too little money into building up the infrastructure in every area, as some other countries also have done. But at the same time, we had a blooming tourism, going from some 500,000 people visiting Iceland 6-7 years ago, and now last year it was 2.3 million. So or something like 20% of all kilometers driven in Iceland is driven by the tourists, our guests.
So it has been huge increase in the traffic. At the same time, we have not built up infrastructure and not maintain the old road as well. So that's two of the challenges. Of course, we have standing off also front of the same challenges as everybody else in the climate change, and we have taken out the taxes of new energy cars, both in import taxes. They of course don't buy benzene, gasoline or diesel, so they don't pay taxes there either, so they don't actually pay anything to finance the road system for the time being. So that's one of the challenges. Of course, we are now just coming up to, what, 4 or 5% of the cars with the new energy in Iceland, but we are assuming that after 10 years, 12, there will be some 35% of all cars with electricity, methane, hydrogen, or some other new energy. And then at that time, the system will totally collapse. We will not have any money to build up the infrastructure. So currently in Iceland, almost all infrastructure financing is by the state budget. We have had two public-private infrastructure projects, both tunnels. The first one, now 20 years old, is a very successful one and will most likely be handed over to the state by the end of this year, and all user charges are abandoned. And I think that's important. I cannot tell you why we did not move on that area 20 years ago, but that's because the other one is just 2 years old, and it's also a tunnel. It is in its initial stage, and we are yet to see how it will develop. And even though, and although the current administration has increased the funds for investment in infrastructure for this year and for the next year, we are far behind both in maintaining and modifying the existing infrastructure and investing in new ones. And the current increase in funds is far from enough to maintain sufficient investments, and there is a high demand on the state budget for added funds to various welfare issues as well. And therefore, we in Iceland need to look for alternative ways to finance infrastructure investments. We are currently looking into a mixture of additional financing methods. We are looking into a user charging scheme for certain projects that fulfill certain preconditions. There should always be we are talking about at the time being, that should always be an alternative route, and the project considered for a user charging scheme should not be in the transport investment plan, at least not in near time. And the preconditions should not be discriminatory and apply to all projects. The idea is that there will be an automated charging system with a modest charge. And in the case of a low traffic, the idea is that the state will co-finance the project, making it financially viable. In addition to this model I just described, we are also considering a time-based charging. And this system has various advantages. One is that in Iceland being an island, the system can be designed in such a way that charge collection and enforcement can be both simple and cost-effective. This can be a very cost-effective solution for Iceland when taking in advance of being an island with no link to external road system. So we have not the same challenge as you have in all other Nordic countries with cross-boarding cars from other countries. At least we know every car that came into Iceland. But having said that, the future system and the best system, we believe, is generally considered to be the distance-based system and is foreseen to replace the time-based system in the long run. However, the technology is, at least we believe, still too expensive and needs to be developed further before it can be applied to all traffic, including passenger vehicles. But because of the urgency of acquiring for funds for infrastructure investment, Iceland needs to act soon and look into a time-based solution, at least as an interim solution. I have appointed a project group tasked with looking closely into the possibility I have now described, and this project group will be handling in its proposal report by the end of this year. Hopefully that report will be the substance of successful discussion on the issue, resulting in a widely accepted approach to future financing the infrastructure projects. It is of a considerable importance for the discussion in Iceland to look to successful public-private financing setups in other Nordic countries, a scheme that have been politically and publicly accepted in Scandinavia could be a tool and reach consensus in the issue in Iceland. It's easier to sell people in Iceland something that's going well in the other Nordic countries. This brings us to the question on how different financing solutions be best used and utilized within the Nordic countries. In my opinion, it is reasonable not only to discuss the investment itself, but also how to finance the life cycle of the investment, including the maintenance. What is the best model for this, and what is the best model for joint financing, public and private? I do not have the answer for that, but I'm looking forward to learn about the views and experience of the other Nordic countries, and that's actually the reason we are here. We are to listen and to learn. There are general political acknowledgement on the need for added funds in Iceland for infrastructure investment. Same applies to so many other policy issues, especially welfare issues. Infrastructure projects tend to be extremely expensive. It basically boils down to the prioritization of public spending and the policy of the government. The road user charging is one of the most controversial issues concerning private funding and the issue of public acceptance. There is, however, a growing understanding of the need for external financing for infrastructure investment, since traditional solutions do not meet the current need. And actually, my dear Norwegian colleague, the general public in Iceland have the same view as you. We hate the toll system. But, and the Icelandic Association of Automobile Owners have in the past been very vocal in their opposition for ideas involving user charging schemes, toll system. The reasoning is twofold. First, the car owners are already overtaxed. Secondly, that the administration costs of user charging are too high, and too much money is wasted on administration, collection system, and enforcement that could otherwise be allocated in the investments. But there seems to be a recent shift in the discussion. At the meetings, the association has recognized the need for investment and opened it up for more fundraising. And the time-based system, as described before, could therefore be an answer to their demands. One discussion in Iceland has been that about PPP. It's called in Icelandic einkaframkvæmd, private project, and that's too bad. So we have been working on how to change that, and I think the collateral projects would be the solution to calling the PPP project collateral projects. Then everybody will be on board on that. The other issue mentioned here earlier today is, of course, that we have to understand that investment are not expense, but we are investing in the future. And that's probably is our job, the ministers, the politicians, to make the general public understand that. Then our job will be easier.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Sigurdur Ingi Johansson. Before we give the word to Sweden, I would like to ask you if there is something you would like to copy from the other Nordic countries.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that in the general view in Iceland, that goes well in the Nordic countries. That should be our aim to do. Being an island, we don't have to use the same system, but it is easier to sell the general public in Iceland all ideas that are going well in the Nordic countries. So therefore we benefit a lot from collaboration, and of course we can collaborate both in research and in investments and other things in the future, but that's the best part for us in Iceland is to cooperate and working with our colleagues. Good.
Yeah. I know that all the other Nordic countries would like to copy your way to play football.
Yeah, and I'm using this today.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Because it is a game day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are going to win Croatia
day
today.
Yes.
Or lose.
Yeah.
I hope we win.
Yeah. We are with you. But we are going further on. Next we turn to Sweden. Please welcome Director General Ola Nordlander. The stage is yours.
Dear ministers, dear audience, thank you very much for inviting me here. Unfortunately, my infrastructure minister, Mr. Thomas Eneroth, couldn't be here, so he's sending me instead. So hopefully I will fit his suit. As well as in Norway, in Sweden we have 12-year plans for infrastructure investments, and actually they are the same time period as well. So for this May, the Swedish government decided on a new infrastructure plan for the coming 12-year period from 2018 to 2029, and as in Norway, it's revised every 4th year. So during a mandate period for the government, they're revising the infrastructure plan. The infrastructure plan, as in Norway, they are dealing a lot of things, and it's coming out from very wide discussions and very complex situations that the politicians are going to solve. But as the ministers have told about what are the goals with this plan. Yes, it's a plan for the whole economy, and it's a plan for the whole society. And it's also for every citizen who is using the infrastructure and transport. It's also something that the Swedish government are very much in front of and dealing about making Sweden a permanent world exhibition for development and technology in the transport area. Very much the digitalization is to be handled in this plan, and also the climate challenge. And particularly this shows when we see what the investments in general are, and the general investments are making in railway. So it's about 150 billion Swedish kronor that's going to be invested in railways the coming 12 years. In new railway, should I say. To that we have the amount of money that is about 125 billion for the maintenance and operations of the railway network. Also, if I should point out some of the particular investments that is going to be made in this plan, it's the new high-speed rail network between Stockholm, Göteborg and Stockholm, Malmö. That is probably the largest investments to be done. But the investment is also said to be done in a way that the economy can handle. That is also meaning that they start with the 3 endpoints, a part just south of Stockholm and north of Malmö, and between Göteborg and Borås. So that's the biggest investments to be done. And also there are some other investments in the northern Sweden between Skellefteå and Luleå. It's called the North Bothnia Line. The infrastructure planning in Sweden needs to be, it's a national matter, but it's very much the cooperation across the borders are very necessary. So for the countries that we are sharing the borders with, Denmark and Norway and Finland as well, it's very important that we have a good cooperation with them. So we see some of the bridges over Öresund and Svinesund are good examples of how we are planning and cooperation in infrastructure planning, and also that we're using another form of financing that we're using with tolls. In Sweden, we have a way of financing the infrastructure. It's with the appropriations on state budget, although certain exceptions can be made if the Swedish Parliament votes for it in favor for alternative financing on project-by-project basis. So that, as we have heard before, we have congestion taxes in Stockholm, and also we have congestion taxes in Gothenburg. And also we have some of the bridges on the road network that are financed with tolls. But I should say that Sweden has very little experience of public-private partnership, PPPs. Actually, it's the only one we have is the Arlandabanan that stretches from Stockholm City to the Arlanda Airport. And that is the only PPP project that we have. But in a way of dealing with this, and in the political area that was very intensive during this mandate period, the government commissioned a study about financing public infrastructure investments from taxes, fees, and private financing that was made in 2016. And in 2017, they came back with a result. And the result was that they assesses that using PPP models to finance national infrastructure investments potentially could lead to increased efficiency. However, this efficiency gains have not, in a systematic way in empirical studies, been scientifically proven. I could say that the government now, the Commission said that the government should decide about making a project, with starting up with some PPP projects in this infrastructure plan. But the government didn't decide to do that, so we'll see what now the future is in this. Otherwise, however, the Swedish government pointed very particularly out in this infrastructure plan about electrifying roads. That is one of the ways of to develop the transport on roads. And there they given the Trafikverket was given the mandate to sort out of how this could be financed and how to build a business model for this. So Trafikverket has now a role of performing this and presented to the government. And also I could point out that the discussions about the new railway network for high-speed trains is something that the government now has gone to the political opposition to talk about how this could be financed in a long-term way. Because the starting points, as I told you, at the 3 points, they are financed with the infrastructure budget, but this is given a handout for the political opposition to talk about how this could be long-term made, how this could be made in a long-term view, and something that is not a political issue, actually. So we'll see what that will end up with. Yes, I think I stop there.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Director General Ola Nordlander. Actually, you said that the cooperation over the borders is very important, and you have already built a bridge to Denmark, together with Denmark. And I would like to ask, what else could we do together? What kind of cooperation could there be between or among the Nordic countries?
We have a bridge to Norway as well, so
yeah,
we built that one.
Many bridges.
We'll see. We have very much cross-border traffic, especially with Denmark and Norway. So the government, the Swedish government, are now they are having discussions with the ministers about how we could develop this. It's primarily for the Oslo region, but also the Malmbanan, where we have up in the north of Sweden. And as well, there is cross-border traffic to Finland from Haparanda Tornio. And of course, there is a discussion about a new permanent connection to Denmark via Helsingborg-Helsingør as well. So that is our, of course, to have a big, in a wider scope. You look at this, and you have yeah.
Good, sounds good. But then it's Finland's turn. Please welcome Minister Anne Berner.
Thank you. And when we look from a perspective of Finland, I have to say it's very similar to what we hear from Norway and Sweden and Iceland. There is no problem in looking at how we finance airports. We don't have any problem when we look at our harbors and how they are financed. It's actually clear that a company structure is logical. We have client fees that come in, and the finance is built up like any other business model that you have. When we look at our rails and roads, it's much more complicated. And we had a parliamentarian group in Finland where we agreed between all 9 parties in our current parliament that we would first of all revise our budgetary tool so that we can always finance a project at least over 1 term, so that we don't have to finance over yearly budgets. The second was that we will also go in for a 12-year plan for our infrastructure, including airports, harbors, certain access on rails and roads, and create an infrastructure vision that carries 12 years, which being revised on a rolling base every 4 years. We also agreed that when we look at big projects, we can create a company structure or a project company, for instance, for a tunnel between Helsinki and Tallinn, or for a project like the Arctic Rail between Norway and Finland, or any other large projects. Mostly they would be rail projects, and mostly they would be over €1 billion. euros. Again, we don't see that there is really an issue in finding a financial structure when we speak about a really big-sized project and when we speak about rails where we still have some sort of mechanism to get a revenue into the project, which is put into the ticketing system of using the rails. The big problem which we have, and I think it's common for all countries and most countries, is the roads. Finland is a sparsely inhabited country with large distances. We have been looking at solutions in Canada, in Australia that were already mentioned, but also really interesting solutions in Chile, in Argentina, in later years. But also when we look at Germany and other countries, we see that mostly different solutions, as also now found in Norway, are looking towards how can we create more efficiency into the euros that we put in, how do we minimize risk, and how do we create a life cycle into the long-term vision of a road project. And when we think about it here, we have to still somehow take into account that mobility is becoming a service. Mobility is based on data. Mobility is becoming more and more automated. Mobility is based in the future on different technologies. How can that be a benefit for us to create new financial instruments? Who else can benefit from the data that infrastructure is providing? Who else can also be a user of infrastructure without actually touching the infrastructure? Who else needs a certain service level guaranteed on that infrastructure? And who are the beneficiaries of infrastructure investments? And so what we have been working on now in our ministry is also to see what are the real impact models of an infrastructure investment when we speak about roads. We know that mostly when we increase our investment in our infrastructure, we increase by default almost always the value of the land. We also create probably a faster access from one point A to a point B. We increase the speed into which those points are connected. We also create probably a higher competitiveness for either a region or nationally. And so we have to look at what will be the return. When we discuss with our Ministry of Finance, we always stumble across the question that governments get money cheaper than anybody else. That's true, but it takes a long time. What could we benefit that if we can build a fast connection between two cities on rails or roads, if we can do it 15 years faster? If we have a shared risk model and we have a public-private finance. And we can do it because of that 15 years faster. How much would we nationally benefit from the increase of the value of the land, housing projects, access of labor markets, and how would we evaluate those if we have to look at the cost of the finance? At the same time, all of this will create new kinds of data. Again, who can use that? Probably it would be easy to say every gas station has a benefit, maybe even tire companies have a benefit, but I think in the future, probably most export-import trade will benefit from that data. How can we capitalize on that? And how can we create models where we can say that the transport, how we take our income from the transport systems could be changed in the future? Now, we have a strong reaction when we look at financial models because everyone says we have a taxation on the car, exactly as Ketil said, when we buy it, when we use it, and when we drive it. So we have to somehow find a solution, and that model, by the way, creates an old car park for us, mostly. So we have to find a way where we can lower those taxations so that our car park turns around faster, which would be a benefit for climate change. At the same time, we would have to find a different model where we can use income, probably using that data. And then we need more payers for it. Not only those who are on the road, but also those who otherwise benefit from that data. And then we should not call it a tax. We have to call it a fee or a payment so that we can actually connect it back to the infrastructure. Our taxation goes all to the Ministry of Finance. We would like to see a model where actually the funding goes back to the infrastructure. And for this, I think we have to rethink the whole thing. And this is why Finland has tried to be very active on this question. We are trying to push mobility as a service faster forward because it enables us to open and require open data. Then we need to make sure that that data flows freely. And then we need to also make sure that in the future of digital economy, we also need to find models that benefit the government and the society in a certain way. And one way would be to also find ways to come back to infrastructure. So for us, I don't believe personally anymore in the models of tolls, not because of political reasons, but because I think the model will be outdated very soon. And I think we have to look at infrastructure as a platform or as a network that you pay to have access to. And then when you have access to it, it doesn't matter where your vehicle physically is. And is it on a low-driven road or on a high-driven road? It wouldn't matter. And that, I think, is the best learning that we can take from our telecommunications, where we basically buy a SIM card, we have an access to the infrastructure, and it doesn't matter if we speak here in Helsinki, we are still paying for the infrastructure in Kajaani as well. The same sort of user pools. And originally, we bought only the access to speak on that network. Today, that network is used for so many other things. And I think the physical infrastructure will be that same thing in the future. It will be used for many other things that are not necessarily physically touching the road at all. And there we have to find the ways. How can we create a new system, a new thinking, in order to actually make infrastructure into something which is, as it's supposed to be, the veins of the country, the blood veins of our society, and the edge of our competitiveness. And I think it takes us more than we have been still touching upon today.
Thank you, Anne Berner. Now we have time for the discussion, and you are all again welcome to join with questions. Just raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. And remember again to introduce yourselves before asking. And I am following the Twitter feed as well. So if you want to use that channel, it's possible to ask questions on Twitter as well. The hashtag is RIFN18. But now, before we take questions from the audience, I think I would like to hear, I'd like to give the word to the ministers. After hearing your colleagues, what do you think is the most crucial thing in financing new infrastructural projects in the future? Maybe Ketil will start.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I think we do share a lot of the same views on how important infrastructure is and the challenge of financing it and finding the right term for it, because we do see that this is an investment. But I think all of us, when we talk to the Ministry of Finance in our countries, to them it's an expense along all the others. And of course, well, what we experience, of course, some of the infrastructure that we build are just purely politically kind of promoted and really doesn't change society, but it has to do with feeling that my part of the country gets the same part of the money that the other parts of the country. But many and most of the infrastructure investments that we do actually change society. It reduces transaction costs. It's increasing the workforce or the labor market, and connects labor and businesses in a better way. We've had kind of bridge or tunnel projects where you have replaced ferries carrying 800 passenger cars every day. When you have the tunnel, you double that. When you remove the toll that paid for the tunnel, you double it again. Of course, that shows that you changed how people react or how they live in the local society. People can now find different workplaces because you don't have to wait for the ferry or afraid that you're going to lose it. What I think kind of is one of the main challenges is that you have to find the incentive where both our government or taxpayers' money, but also private capital, can find projects and improve the scope of them or finish them faster, because there's a link between what we pay as a taxpayer or as a kind of a consumer and how the financing is working. If everything we are paying for infrastructure goes into the national budget and you have to fight for it to come back, you don't have that link. If you have it, maybe through toll roads.
Maybe.
But then you have to reduce the other car taxes so you don't kind of make taxes too high in total. And it's the total tax that matters. But if you have the link where you pay for the service and the money will go back either to pay for what you built or to finance the next, then you can start looking at how you involve private pension funds and other things. At the same time, we do have a few projects in Norway where we're trying to see, we're building an airport in the middle of Norway up in Mo i Rana, where you try to have private capital move first and then the government capital will come afterwards. You have the train connection between Stockholm and Oslo, that's 255, where private capital wants to build the line. And they say, or at least when they talk to us as a politician, they say that we think this can be self-financing. Why will still, I'm pretty sure the government or the finance department in Norway say, wow, we don't know about this. It's because you're afraid that you build something and then you run up, you end up having no funds to finish it, and you just expect government to pay for it after all. And in that sense, you manage to kind of skip your waiting line and you build something. So finding the right framework where you can involve the private money, somehow make sure that you get the payments back, but not putting all the risk on government budget. I think that's one of the tasks that we have to solve.
What do you think about this?
Well, I believe one of the questions we have to answer was, don't remember if it was Ingrid or Thorberg was mentioned that earlier, that the question we have to answer the voters that who is owning the infrastructure for longer time. If we are building up with private partnerships, public-private partnerships, is it just to finance the buildings and how to maintain them and have them up on driving for a long time? I think our Faroese friends, they are building tunnels they are building actually tunnels number 20 and there are only 50,000 people. They have some fee on the time when they are building it up. But after they have captured the cost of the building cost, then they lower the fee, just 10 to 10% or something like that, and then they got some money to recircle both for the maintenance of the tunnels and also to start a new tunnel next time. So
that's one model.
That's one model.
Yeah, sounds great. What do you think when you have heard about the other countries?
Well, like I said, I think we have a lot of the same issues. I think it would be great if we can find some of the ways of how we deal with the data part in the same way, so that we can create one digital market in transport. And I think it would help us to move along in many of the other fields. The more we can create those services and move in that direction, I think we could then easier also find other models. I think our issues with the finance ministers, our issues are exactly the same.
Yeah, of course.
So we know that very well. So we have to find our way around that.
How much effort have you put in the data part in your countries? What about Sweden?
The mobility as a service,
yes,
and
the
things connected to that is one very central position for our minister, and we have done very much things in common, and yeah, I can't point out.
What about Iceland and Norway?
I think being able to share data, make public data available, and make sure that you don't have one company, government or private, being in a monopoly on how to use these data is key importance. We want to make have a market develop where you can develop services, but everybody should have access to the same data. We do have a strategy when it comes to how government agencies should make data available, make a common platform, and in the kind of mass transit area, we took what used to be the department for the ticket system in the National Railroad Company, providing the service, and took them to make them an own company as part of the railroad reform, and now they have to make data available for all, not just train, but also buses. And so there are about 60 different companies, but mainly bus companies, but also this railroad company, providing the data into one system. And this government company then makes the database and kind of all of the facilitations around that, making sure it's updated, and one common app that you can use. But of course, you're free to use the data to make your own apps or buy whatever app that this company makes and put your own kind of name tag and add services to that.
Yeah.
So I think we've come quite a way. It's something we worked on for probably 15 years, but we kind of cracked the code, having this ticket system folks from the railroad folks give them a kind of a bigger, broader perspective on what they're doing. And we now have one kind of schedule on the app, and within next year we hope to have one ticket system.
What about Iceland?
Yes, I forgot to mention earlier that, of course, we are also working on the transport planning for both 5 years and 15. Earlier was 4 and 12, but we are also working on communication plan, which I think I will be able to put in the parliament, both the transport planning and the communication planning next autumn. And then we are seeing, and I was inspired by Anne Berner's speech, that the communication and the transport, they are emerging, and we have to look at the future, how these, at least this 15 years planning, are going to talk to each other. And it's a new challenge to find out how we are going to use those data and how to get new buyers or new partners to pay for using them. And then it is a vital thing that in our lawmaking and regulation, we don't regulate too much, so the market can find the solution, and then, of course, by sharing all the data as possible.
Yes.
I could fill in, because in Sweden, the discussion about autonomous vehicles, and of course we're standing for a big shift in especially the road transportation, but as well as you said about the legislation and also about how to send this information alongside the roads and do this efficiently. So yes.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, please. There are many hands. Let's start with Kim over here, and then you and you.
Yes, Kim Wikström from Åbo. This question about data and its importance in infrastructure also brings in quite interesting aspects of who actually will own the data, or should anyone own the data, and also some of the quality and security issues around, because I mean, of course, if someone now goes on a road putting up their own signs and starts to do a lot of things, you probably get into some trouble. So how should we deal with this? Because in a way we want to boost the development of high utilization rates, new business models, but we also have the question of the quality of the data and the ownership. That is quite interesting. So just an open question to any one of you.
Who wants to answer? Anne.
Well, in Finland we have actually regulated both how the data should be opened, how you have, what kind of open APIs you have, but also we have regulated quite a large piece of law, which is actually becoming now valid, where we stipulate also the quality of data, how the quality is and how it has to be used so that the markets can provide new services based on that data. And I think beyond ownership issues that we have to discuss on data, we have to discuss user rights. And I think when we speak in the European Union about the regulation of data and the free flow of data, we are also speaking more and more about the user rights. And when we speak about autonomous vehicles or autonomous traffic management, we have to have access to user rights of data in the transport system. And this is something which needs further discussion and also further understanding, but that will be crucial.
What about Norway?
Well, I think the ownership to data, in one sense, all your private data should be owned by yourself. And the privacy issues are important in our discussion, and kind of pretty much for everything we do, we need to have kind of the data supervision board, I don't know, the datatilsynet we call them, make sure that, you know, we have to involve them when we start a project, not when we're about to finish it, because if they always come in late, you have to start over again anyway. But when it comes to kind of anonymous numbers, how many people drive through here, go from this station to that station, of course, as long as they're anonymous, we should share them, because that gives information for us when it comes to planning and decision, and it gives information for the mass transit companies or taxi companies when it comes to what kind of services you want to provide. But we do also experience in Norway that most people, if they are asked, do you want to share your data if that can give you benefits back, most people will say yes. But I think we need to make sure that you always agree on that still. We should not just take that for granted. But when you talk to, for instance, Ruta, which is the mass transit company in Oslo, their idea is to just make sure that when you approach a subway train and your cell phone is recognized, it will know who you are. It will automatically ticket you. And it knows that you usually goes from this station to that station and will provide you services. You want us to also notify the bus that you're coming, or you want your taxi to come pick you, you know, things like that. And again, most people will see this as a valuable thing that they will accept. So as long as they don't distrust the system, I think most people will be more than willing to share data about themselves. But of course, I think especially the older population coming from kind of a Cold War setting and everything, where who is actually using your data and what kind of bad things are they up to, you do have a generational gap in this.
What about Iceland and Sweden?
Well, I think, of course, we have to look very carefully into the personal data, and now we are all implementing a new law about that. So that's an important thing when we are discussing about how to sharing all data. But I think it's very important that we can do that, sharing data as much as possible, because thereby through that we can build up something we cannot imagine now, but just let the market do that.
And Sweden?
I think the things is already said.
Yeah.
So I'm not.
You're on the same level?
I'm on the same level, yes.
Yeah. And then the next question.
Yeah, so it's Markus Pauli from Keva. And for those who don't know, Keva, it's a Finnish pension fund, and we have roughly 53 billion euros under management. We have been investing in private infrastructure since, say, 5-10 years, but we would like to be much more active in this area. And I think this is true for most of the Nordic pension funds, that they consider infrastructure to be a really interesting asset class. I mean, they are stable, long-term, inflation-linked assets, and many investors would like to take part in that asset class. But the problem has really been that we haven't seen any projects really, or very few projects on our table. We can't really create these projects ourselves. We can analyze them and we can finance them, and we can monitor the investments. But the question to you, open question, what do you expect from the private investors or pension funds at this point? Really, if anything, could the pension funds or private investors be active or take more active part in creating these assets, or is it more a political question and private investors should more be passive and wait for the projects to come?
So there is a willingness. What about the politicians? What do you say? Maybe Anne will start because
I think we are the obstacle.
From Keva. Yeah.
We are probably still a little bit the obstacle, but I think we will need a rethinking on the. First of all, we have to make sure that infrastructure is seen as an investment, and we are still, as we have said here already many times, having the problem also in our governmental environment, where we see a part of it sees it as an expenditure, and we would like to see it as an investment. So that's the first hurdle we have to come over. The second is that I think now that, for instance, also in Finland we are sort of having the political understanding that we can create project companies for infrastructure, I think we will probably have a better ability to create projects and also to create better possibilities for pension funds to participate in financing. And I think there is a political will across the parties to have pension funds participating in infrastructure finance. We just have to find a way. And there I would still ask for activeness on the part of the pension funds in creating very clear stipulations on what is possible from your side and what isn't. And I think once we sort of have those frameworks, it will be easier also to develop the project. I think some problem that we often face is that in a political discussion, the idea is that a pension fund wants just a return on investment and the rest is, not so important. And I think we have to get over that discussion.
In Sweden, you have a problem with the legislation, I have understood.
Yeah, among other things.
Yes.
As me as not a politician, I could say for me the answer that Mrs. Berner said was very much what I think my politicians also would say. Mm. So that's the Swedish way of the Swedish view as well.
Yeah, but you have the legislation problem. The pension funds cannot invest in the same way.
But the commission that I was talking about earlier, they did also. They still are performing, and that is one of the questions that they are looking into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And Norway and Iceland. The pension funds.
Yeah, we can say the same thing as Anne Berner said. I think there has been perhaps a little bit a lack of interest from the pension fund to invest in infrastructure in Iceland. They are going more into companies and buying shares, but they have a lot of money, and we actually have some problem with that. They have to go abroad with the money because they are going to be too big in the Icelandic market. But
they need the government needs the pension funds.
No, we have to get the money out of the countries, actually,
yeah.
to just lower the price of the krona.
Okay. What about Norway?
Well, we are interested in more private-public partnerships.
Yeah.
We do have a few road projects now, not with the Nya Veier, but with the National Public Road Administration that we have decided are going to be private-public partnerships.
Yeah.
But in the public debate, though, you have the kind of the Norwegian approach here is that we already have the oil fund invested abroad. So you do have a really huge challenge convincing the public why do we need to borrow money from pension funds when we already have our own pension fund investing abroad.
Your situation is special.
Yeah, so that's one thing. But the other thing I think also that is probably the common challenge is that when we build infrastructure, it's considered a common good, and you don't pay the real cost of using it. And therefore, you don't have the link of income to pay for the financing. So again, most of the time you end up having this being just a budget expenditure. And again, people don't then see why should we borrow this money when we already have the money. If you could probably kind of for the airports and some of the like the international railroad projects, the pension fund approach could be a good thing because it's gonna kind of challenge the way we usually build things because it does involve more than one country. So I think the PPP and the pension funds then is probably a really good way of approaching the increased use of this.
Anne Berner.
Yes, I just wanted to say very shortly that I think when we have been speaking about this in Finland, we are not speaking about borrowing money from the pension funds. We see the pension funds more as owners.
Okay, good to know.
Potential owners.
Yeah. The last question from the audience, please.
Thank you, Baba. My name is Karri Salminen. I'm from ITS Finland. ITS Finland is your intelligence transportation network association, same as ITS Sweden and ITS Norway and ITS Denmark. I don't know if the ITS association is there in Iceland. Anyhow, the open data and data issues is very important, and if I think the investors for the future infrastructure, which by the way has to be very intelligent, because all the equipments are coming more and more clever. So the question of the ownership is very crucial, and we have to, I think, solve that so soon as possible, because combination of the private-owned data and infrastructure data, when there's infrastructure is intelligence, you can collect the transportation data. Combination of those two things is very powerful to create the new services, and it can be part of the infrastructure investors' business model also. But other thing is actually very interesting is the cooperation between these Nordic countries, and how do you see the single Nordic market creation? How soon can it be possible as like mobility as a service operators to make equal services which can be used every Nordic countries with the same apps or same services? It would be great possibility for invest for that.
Yeah, that sounds very good. I think many of us would like to have that one, but I think it needs some work. What do you say? How soon do we have a system that works everywhere in the Nordic countries? Yes.
Well, first to say, we of course have IT in Iceland.
Nice to hear that.
Actually, just to be a little bigger than we usually are. We are ranking #1 in the world at the IPU. That's to say we are best in IT in the world. About this whole market in the Nordic countries, I think it's a very important thing to do, and the Prime Minister, they have set this up to on the agenda. So we are actually working on it, but how soon, I cannot say. But if all the countries are going to work together with that agenda, I think we can manage in not so many years. Hopefully.
So you start today?
Hopefully. Actually, it started.
Yes.
About the 5G, the same system over all the Nordic countries. It's a very important thing.
What about Norway?
It's hard to say exactly how long time, but I think within a few years you'll see this probably be a reality, even though you can't point to a specific plan. But just seeing how much we have achieved the past 2 years, I believe that our different agencies or companies already working on this will just have to talk more together. And we have brought our company, Entur, which are doing this on behalf of us, to talk with the Finnish folks today since we're here. And there are so much exciting things happening. It just has to deal with making sure that our different data systems are working, and that we manage to share on the paragraphs in the law, so that doesn't stop us. But I think that's also feasible. We managed to change the laws making autonomous vehicles ready to be tested on public roads within really short time. We were inspired by the Swedish white paper, but we just kind of skipped the research and copy what you were doing and then added some. And I think that's what we have to do if we want to stay ahead. But just make sure that you make the kind of the ITS community and the Nordic countries talk together, because if you should not wait for politicians to lead the way. I think there are too much knowledge and too many ideas out there for us to kind of put them into white papers and pass them. Time is going way too fast, or development's going way too fast to wait for us. We just have to make the playing ground level and encourage the cooperation.
So we will have a Nordic mobility as a service very soon. What do you think, Anne?
Yes, I hope so. I have been speaking about it for a few years. And we are trying to do that. But I agree with what Ketil said. We have to hope that the markets are moving, and we hope that the few paragraphs which are opening up the APIs can be used in all Nordic countries. We have been speaking about it a lot, and we will continue today. So there's hope.
Sounds good.
Yeah, for as in Sweden, it's an important issue actually, and it's for the minister and the government as a whole. Actually, the government offices have kind of rechanged, and we are settled in another way for just dealing the digitalization issues in some other ways of thinking, and thinking more horizontally. And also the government have given the authorities a large mission for coping with this big issue. So and as well dealing it with in the EU together, and the Nordic countries, that we perform in the same direction.
Sounds good. The last question before the lunch. What have you learned today? What will you take home with you from this event?
I learned a lot, and I think it was quite good to hear that my colleague from Norway have the same view as we in Iceland about the toll system. Because we are struggling to find the right way to financing the future on building these roads. So that could be an easy one, to take the Norwegian model up to Iceland, just fight for it through everybody. But it's difficult. So I think we have heard a lot of other things today. Very inspired by Anne Berner was saying that in the future we have to get some more payers to build up the roads, because there are more people or companies utilizing that. So that should be in a more similar way as both in aviation and shipping. So good start.
A good start.
Good visit.
What about Norway?
Well, I think what's important is, well, the Nordic countries are individually fairly small, but as a region we are, well, of course, naturally bigger, but also if we can manage to make things work, we show that we can have system working across borders. And I think maybe that's why if we can agree on how to finance infrastructure across border and stuff, Norway, the Nordic countries will be a more powerful region in the way where people should look to us, because we manage to solve problems across borders. What I think is maybe the most important is that you've heard a willingness from all the different countries that this is something that we are positive to find solutions for. And maybe that's the biggest hurdle, because in the political debate you will find people who will say that we should not involve the private sector when it comes to financing. We should not look at the contractors as something important because they are just out to make profit. And having this willingness to search for new solutions, I think maybe that's the most important part, because then you start processes where you actually will find them eventually. But again, I think doing the cross-border projects is probably the best way of approaching the public-private partnership or the pension fund, where maybe, as Anna says, it's not the individual government or state owning infrastructure, but we may just kind of pay a lease, a rent, for a pension fund or a group of pension funds actually owning it. And involving the capital markets and the contractors together with the governments to find better solutions, I think maybe that's the key here, because at least my 4.5 years as a minister, we met a system where kind of the government knew all and kind of had a monopoly sense on what to do, and usually monopolies are not the fastest to develop.
That's true. What about Sweden?
I could say that I've learned that it's very much the same issues that we're dealing with in the Nordic countries.
Yeah, that's true.
And I also fully stand by that we are small countries, but together we could be something bigger, and we can attract and make our voices heard more in the bigger scope. But also, I learned about that the interest from others to invest, it's very actual, and it's here right now. So it's about the debate on making this the long-term investments, and how do we see about the long-term investments. Of course, it's a political issue, and we're dealing as well as with the finance department and how they see when we do the investments in Sweden. But of course, we'll see how the cross-border projects are very interesting, and we have very much a good learning from the Öresundsbron and as well as the Svinesundsbron. So it's interesting to see what we can do about that in the future.
Great. Anne Berner, what will you take home with you from this event?
Well, I think it's important that as Nordic colleagues we have a direct dialogue, that we can exchange thoughts and learn from each other, that we also find solutions, that we create visions which we can share, and then also where we know that we have to go nationally in different ways. And I think today, mostly, I think it is about the potential of infrastructure that is unused, that we still have to find, and where we can then introduce also the interest to other parties and other financial instruments. And I think we are quite close to a solution, but it's not really here yet, but we're coming there. And I think we have to work with the private sector, the institutions, and the public sector together. And governments need to be more enablers in the future.
Sounds great, thank you. And good luck to you all.
Thank you.
Next we have a meeting with the press. Those of you who want to interview the ministers, please move over to the cabinet over there. Oh, it's over there, sorry. The ministers will take a short break first, just a few minutes, and then they are available for further questions. The event will now continue with a late lunch, starting soon over there. You find your way there by taking this way and walk around, and then you find the wonderful lunch over there. I want to thank everyone here today for your great contribution to the discussion. Without your expertise, we wouldn't have moved forward in this issue as much as we did. Thank you very much. Thank to the speakers, to the ministers. I wish you all a lovely summer evening and good luck to your lunch. Thank you and bye-bye.